Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of Serial Saturday. In the last episode, we talked about Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento. I highly recommend checking out that video if you haven't already. It's wild, and we're getting even more wild today. I thought the last case was like over the top. He was somebody I had never really heard about, but this case today we're going to be talking about Robert Willie Pickton, also known as the pig farmer. So this is going to be a very long story. I'm anticipating that I'm going to have to break it up into two parts already, so just be aware of that. I have about 12 pages of notes, so normally I only have 4 to 7 pages, so I'm going to try really hard to get through as much of it as I can today, but I really think that we're just going to have to make this into two. There are far too many important details in this story that I don't want to leave out. So with all that being said, let's get into the makeup. On October 24th, 1949, Leonard and Louise Pickton welcome their firstborn son, Robert William Pickton, aka Willie, which is what we'll be calling him throughout the duration of this story. He was born in Port Coquitlam. I really hope I'm saying that right. British Columbia, on a pig farm not too far from Vancouver. He has a sister, Linda, who his parents sent away to live with relatives in Vancouver because a pig farm is no place to raise a lady. So they sent her away. And then he also has a younger brother, David. The pig farm is just really primitive conditions. I'm talking Louise would often just let pigs and other livestock wander through their house. And she didn't clean up after them, so they would just use the bathroom in the house, and that's how they live. Starting at a very young age, Willie and his younger brother were tasked with chores around the farm, and they worked from sunup till sundown. Their mother was just very demanding of them, even forcing them to prioritize taking care of the pigs and the farm over going to school. In fact, the boys had so many chores around the farm that they really only went to school 2 or 3 days a week at best. So their education was really suffering because of the farm. Even on the days where the children did go to school, it wasn't an escape for Willie. You would think going to school would be at least a nice little break, getting away from the farm and chores and just doing manual labor all the time. But for Willie, he really wasn't the brightest. Plus, their hygiene. Louise prioritized the pigs and the farm over the children bathing themselves, so they quickly earned the nickname Stinky Piggy. He just did not like school, and oftentimes he would skip school completely and just hide under his bed so he didn't have to go. And let me tell you, if you've never been to a pig farm or near a pig farm, because you can smell them miles away, they are very strong smelling, and if you do not shower regularly, you're gonna smell like a hog, and it's not a pleasant smell. Outside of school, Willie did learn a couple of very important life lessons. The first one happened when he was very young. He had worked really hard, saved up a bunch of money, and he chose to use his money to buy himself a pet calf. He really connected with this calf. He loved it. He cared for it every day. He made sure it was fed, taken care of. And it is quite possibly the first and only thing that Willie ever really developed an emotional connection to. And that is until one day he came home from school to find his calf missing. He asked his parents what happened to the calf. His father took him to the barn where Willie found him strung up and slaughtered. Now, if you don't grow up on a farm, this is going to seem very sadistic, but I grew up not necessarily on a farm, but we had cows and that sort of thing. And in our house, we knew growing up, yes, these cows are our pets, we care for them, but one day we're going to eat them. So I kind of feel like this is kind of on Willie here, getting too attached, you know? He was completely inconsolable and he didn't talk to anyone for weeks, but really, it's kind of on him, you know? I get it, he's a kid, but also you live on a farm. You know what happens to the animals that you're raising. So as a teenager, Willie also learned an interesting lesson from his mother when his brother David, who was 16 at the time, decided to take the family truck for a joyride. He ended up hitting a 14-year-old neighbor boy and panicked. He went back home, told his parents what happened, and instead of calling an ambulance, Louise tells Willie, "Take me to this boy. Let's go help him. They arrive on scene and find the boy lying on the side of the road, unconscious, but still alive. So instead of loading him up and taking him to the hospital or something, Louise just rolls him into the ditch where the boy winds up face down in a puddle of water, ultimately drowning. I don't know what lesson she was trying to teach her kids at this point, but clearly it's nothing good. Willie had also, around the age of 16, decided just to completely drop out of school, at which point he got a job as an apprentice for a butcher. Ultimately, he left that job in 1970 and started working for the family farm full-time. Then in 1978, Leonard Pickton passed away, with Louise following the next year, leaving the farm to their 3 children. Linda decided she did not want anything to do with the farm, and she told the brothers, "It's yours." David said he wanted the family home. Willie said, "That's fine, I'm going to live on a trailer in the property, and I'll take care of the farm." David was cool with that arrangement, and things proceeded. Eventually, the brothers sold much of the property for urban development, and at the end, they ended up with about 6.5 hectares, 6,500 acres. And as an adult, Willie was described as being socially awkward, and he was known to exhibit strange behaviors. Something that people also noted about him was that he still stank. So as an adult, he did not learn to take better care of his hygiene. Then in 1996, the brothers come up with this great idea. They're going to start Piggy's Palace Good Times Society. They register this society as a nonprofit charity, claiming that they're using it to organize events and functions to raise funds. For what? I don't really know what they were trying to raise funds for. I think they just kind of said they were trying to raise funds for like poor people. I'm not sure on that. But really, it was just a front for them to throw these massive wild parties and not have to deal with certain regulations. They did have a few family-friendly events, but for the most part, their parties were massive. At times, they had up to 2,000 people in attendance, and the parties quickly became frequented by the Hells Angels. Also, supposedly, members of the police force, prominent local business owners, and even government officials, though I wasn't able to find any, for sure that happened. Also, in large attendance at these parties was sex workers that Willie had brought in from Vancouver's downtown east side, also known as Lautrec, which is the poorest neighborhood in all of Canada, fun fact. Willie also had plenty of pork to sell at these parties, even though by this point in time, they've come into a lot of money after having sold a good chunk of the property. So after they sold all that property, he just kept raising pigs because that's all he really knew, even though he was really financially set at that point. Part of the raising and slaughtering of the pigs entailed that once he was done, he then had to take these scraps to a processing plant in Vancouver. Once he was done there, he would drive to the east side and frequent the porn shops, as well as picking up prostitutes. To most of the addicts and sex workers, he seemed like a relatively nice guy, albeit a smelly guy, but overall he seemed nice, initially. But as time went on, people began to get suspicious of him because it started to seem like the women that he would take with him oftentimes wouldn't return. Many people began going to the police with their suspicions, but the police just ignored them because they were drug addicts and sex workers. It's the 90s. Nobody wants to believe sex workers. Everybody wants to believe the creepy pig farmer who hosts raves in his spare time. I don't understand it, but moving on. On March 23rd, 1997, Wendy Lynn Eistetter is spotted on the side of a rural road by an elderly couple. She appears to be bloody and wounded. She has a handcuff dangling from one wrist. She flags down the couple, who then take her to the nearest hospital. Once there, she receives a treatment for her wounds. Then she recounts her harrowing story to the hospital staff and police. She was working in an area of low track when she was approached by a man she knew as Willie. He offered her drugs and alcohol if she went with him. Despite his overpowering stench and filth, Wendy agrees to go with him. He drives her to his pig farm where they engage in consensual sex. Afterwards, she asks to call her boyfriend, and just as she's about to dial his number, Willie comes up from behind and locks a pair of handcuffs to one of her wrists. As he's attempting to cuff the other wrist, Wendy fights back. Unable to successfully cuff her, he comes at her with a butcher knife. Wendy fights him off, eventually gaining control of the knife herself, at which point she slices him across the throat, causing him to bleed so severely that he passes out from the blood loss. Wendy takes her opportunity to escape, eventually flagging down that couple, ending up at the hospital, but unbeknownst to her, Willie is also in the same hospital, receiving treatment for his wound, and hospital staff end up finding a handcuff key in his pocket that just so happens to match the handcuffs Wendy is wearing. Obviously, Willie is the one who attempted to kill Wendy, and you think that at that point he would be immediately arrested and that would be that. Well, it's not. A few days after the incident, Willie is charged with aggravated assault, attempted murder, and unlawful confinement. Wendy's wounds were so severe that she remained in the hospital for weeks following the incident. On January 27th, 1998, prosecutors dropped the charges against Willie, despite the overwhelming evidence. First of all, you have Wendy's story. Second of all, the key in his pocket. I feel like that is enough. Combined with the fact that he also ends up at the same hospital for a wound that Wendy is telling police she gave him this wound. The key in his pocket matches the handcuffs she's wearing. Plus, they have the elderly couple's testimony. They can say where they picked her up at, not far from Willie's farm. And the hospital staff who can testify to finding the key in his pocket, and Wendy is willing to testify. But the prosecution claims they believe her to be too unstable for a jury to believe due to her drug addiction. Even though they opted not to prosecute him, police decided to keep the evidence they had collected from him just in case. They kept his clothes and a pair of rubber boots, which would then just sit on a shelf in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police evidence locker, where it would gather dust for years. I forgot to mention, the Pickton brothers also own a salvage yard, and after this incident with Wendy, an employee there by the name of Bill Hiscox, at this point, Bill is very aware of all the women that have gone missing from downtown East Side, and he is also very aware of the fact that Willie often frequents there looking for prostitutes. So over the next few years, he began paying more attention, and he noticed that women who visited the farm tended to go missing afterwards. By 1999, Bill decided he could not hold in his suspicions any longer, so he goes to the police. He tells them everything he knows, including the story that he heard from another friend. She told Bill she saw women's clothing, purses, and identification papers at the pig farm. She believed it to be the property of missing women, but because Bill wasn't actually the person who saw these things, police did nothing. They said, we need to hear from her directly or our hands are tied. She refused to cooperate, so things just kind of ended there with that. Another tip came from a man who told police his sister, Lynn Ellingson, had been living with Willie for quite some time when one day she calls her brother, telling him she must flee for her life after witnessing something horrific. She told him one night Willie brought a woman home from the load track to a party. Lynn noted that the woman had a pretty color of nail polish on her toenails. At one point, the woman and Willie went into his bedroom to engage in sex. Lynn remained in the living room and did drugs until she passed out. She woke up sometime later when she thought she heard a noise, so she went outside to check it out. At this point, she noticed a light on in the slaughterhouse and ventured down there to see what was going on. As soon as she opens the door, she sees a woman's feet with pretty colored toenails dangling right in front of her face. The woman had been strung up and disemboweled like a hog, and Willie was slicing flesh off of her thigh. Lynn screamed, which obviously caught Willie's attention, but she promised him that all she wanted was drugs and some cash, and she would get the hell out of there and never tell anybody what she saw. Surprisingly, Willie actually agrees to this and lets her go. Once again, police tell the tipster that they cannot act on this unless they hear from the eyewitness themselves, and unfortunately, Lynn initially denies everything. It isn't until much later on that she admits that she did in fact witness this horrific act. Police receive yet another tip pointing them in Willie's direction. This tipster claims that Willie has a freezer full of human flesh. At this point, police are like, okay, so we should probably talk to Willie, so they interview him, and he's like,
no, I don't have a freezer full of human flesh. That's crazy.
Police are like,
that's what we thought. But like, just to please everybody, can we maybe search your farm?
And Willie says,
yeah, of course.
Though they never do. That is some dark blush. That is my bad. This man named Kim Rosmo developed this technique called geographic profiling, which helps find patterns in unsolved crimes. He went to his superiors with a theory that there was a serial killer preying on the poor women of downtown East Side, but his theory was dismissed. The lead investigator thought there was nothing to it, and that was it. But you have a serial killer. Come on, pay attention. Finally, in 2001, the Vancouver police and the RCMP formed a project Even-Handed. It's a joint task force formed to investigate the missing women of downtown East Side. Finally, in 2001. I mean, they've been going missing since at least the 80s, but it takes them 20 years to be like,
Hey, we have a problem here.
Then in early February of 2002, a former employee of the Pickton family, Scott Chubb, goes to the RCMP in Port Coquitlam, and he tells them that he had personally seen illegal guns in Willie's trailer. So it's not like murder or dead bodies, like something that would really get him, but at least it's something. At least there's something here that police can arrest him on now. And on February 5th, 2002, officers of the task force raided the pig farm. In addition to several illegal and unregistered guns, they found items connecting to the missing women on the property. Who would have thought? Willie was arrested on weapons charges and then released on bail, but he was kept under surveillance and he was not allowed to return to the pig farm while police were conducting a thorough search under a second warrant. During the search, some of the evidence they discovered during the search includes, but is not limited to, handcuffs, night vision goggles, photos of a garbage can containing the remains of a victim, women's clothes and shoes, jewelry, an asthma inhaler prescribed to Serena Abotsway, who just happened to be one of the women that was missing. Who would have thought? And DNA testing of blood found in a motorhome on the property proved to be that of Mona Wilson, another missing woman. On February 2nd, 2002, Willie was rearrested and charged with 2 counts of murder. By 2005, 26 murder charges were brought against him. While Willie was being held in jail in Surrey, British Columbia, he shared a cell with an undercover RCMP officer that he believed to be another detainee. So, during conversation, Willie shared with his cellmate that he had, in fact, actually murdered 49 women, and he was just kind of disappointed he wasn't able to make it an even 50. Police were able to conclude through reports and tape confessions from Willie himself that the women had been killed multiple ways. Some had been handcuffed and stabbed, like Wendy, while others he injected with antifreeze. I feel like he had to have kept them locked up somewhere for a while. Either that or he just gave them like a ridiculous amount of antifreeze, because antifreeze is a slow, painful death. He then bled, gutted, and ran them through a wood chipper before ultimately feeding them to his pigs. Though there are some people who believe that he would grind up the meat and mix it in with pork and then give that meat to his friends and family or serve it at the Piggy Palace parties. Various theories here as to what he exactly did with the bodies once he killed these people, but either way, whatever he did, it was very gruesome. So, getting back to the investigation, while police were searching the pig farm, it became the largest crime scene in Canadian history. And in fact, a second court order was obtained to continue searching the farm as part of the British Columbia missing women investigation. All in all, investigators took about 200,000 DNA samples and seized around 600,000 exhibits. So, material evidence, I would suppose. And archaeologists and forensic experts needed heavy equipment to sift through 383 cubic yards of soil in search of human remains. The cost of the investigation was estimated to be around $70 million. And that is all the time we have for today. I honestly really kind of figured this is about all the further I was going to get. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so when part 2 goes up next Saturday, you will be notified. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!